Welcome to Alt Speaking, the podcast that explores the latest in longevity science. Today, we're privileged to interview Dr. Bob Harari, CEO of Celularity, a pioneer in biotechnologies aimed at extending human health span. Bob has been called one of the founders of the modern longevity movement. His research and his commercial endeavors has significantly shaped the modern longevity industry through his groundbreaking work in cellular therapies and regenerative medicines. From co-founding Celgene Cellular Therapeutics and Human Longevity Incorporated to his recent venture Fountain Life, Harari has consistently pushed the boundaries of personalized medicine and longevity research. His integration of biotech with information technology has been instrumental in advancing the field. Bob was born into a family of physicians, and his passion for science began early. After earning his MD and PhD from Cornell, Bob's research on placental stem cells laid the foundation for his future work. And under his leadership, Celularity has made significant strides in cellular medicine, developing a proprietary platform for large-scale production of placental-derived stem cells. Cellularity's focus extends beyond research with products like Biovance, which is already on the market, and promising therapies like CYNK001, which is in development. The company's emphasis on adult stem cell collection and storage offers new hope for treating age-related conditions. Basically, they collect your stem cells now, regardless of how old you are, and the older version of you can use them later to treat diseases that crop up. This podcast was recorded at Cellularity's headquarters in New Jersey, right across the street from the New York Jets training facility. And this interview underscores the shared pursuit of extended peak performance and health span. I mean, think about it. Aaron Rodgers is 40, and he is still one of the best quarterbacks in the NFL. Dr. Harari's visionary approach to strategic partnerships have positioned Celularity at the forefront of the fight against aging. We had a great time recording this interview, so join us as we explore the cutting-edge science behind Cellularity's mission with Dr. Bob Harari. Bob, as always, it's a pleasure to be with you.
Thanks, Louis. It's great to be here. Thank you for inviting me.
Yeah, so alternatively speaking, is a conversation about longevity. The business of it, the science of it, the investment theses of it, all of that. And full disclosure, you are a client of KCSA's. And, over the course of time that we've worked together, you have told me that, a lot of the research that Celularity has done over the years since its founding and your history as a doctor and a researcher undergird a lot of the work that's being done broadly in longevity science. Can you give me a background on what you see of what you have done to help establish the basis for longevity science and where your research is going?
Well, I have to admit that my first interest in cellular medicine emerged when I was looking for a tool to help restore function in severely brain-injured patients, because my specialty was traumatic brain injury and spinal cord injury. And at the dawn of the science around stem cells, I said, wow, if you can turn back on the natural regenerative power that exists and is resident in every stem cell, you might be able to repair these brains and spinal cords and get people back to a level of function that existed before their accidents. What I learned is that stem cells exert much of their biological activity by orchestrating responses to inflammation, responses to the signaling for repair and regeneration. And over the last 30 years, I think I've become kind of an expert in understanding that this biology is fundamental and potentially applicable to everything that matters to healthcare providers. So think of it this way. I had a realization or an epiphany that stem cells were nature's toolkit. And how could I deploy nature's toolkit in a practical, pharmaceutical-like way so that it became part of medicine? Not just a scientific oddity, but something that's really part of medicine. And so what I've learned is that, and it should be apparent to everybody, except for accidents, which is what I was focusing on before, traumatic events, most of the acquired illnesses and diseases are a function of processes that are very much linked to the same biology that you see in aging, and that there is a slow accumulation of defects, and that accumulation of defects leads to loss of function and lack of survivability that potentially could be reversed or arrested or delayed by using cellular elements from stem cells that restored the pool of healthy cells you need to have a normal, healthy life. So that's how I got into this sort of realization that much of what I was learning pointed a finger at applying these tools at the problems you see with aging.
So, when a lot of people hear the word stem cell, it's a political word in some ways, right? There was a lot of conversation 20 years ago about stem cell research, and the stem cells were harvested from aborted fetuses.
Or discarded embryos.
Or discarded embryos. You have focused significant work and research and dollars on placental-derived stem cells. What's unique about them? What properties do placental cells have that we don't have to harvest from fetuses or aborted embryos? Like, what makes these cells sing?
So you bring up probably the most important factor that influenced why I decided to focus my career and my life on this field, which was that as powerful as stem cells appeared to be as a biological tool, the early work, like you pointed out, of collecting stem cells from embryos, actually destroying an embryo to recover these cells, or collecting the materials as a byproduct of an abortion, I saw that as a fatal flaw, that if that was where we were going to get cells, right off the bat, you have half the population objects to it morally and ethically out of the gate. And wouldn't that be tragic if a tool that we think is going to transform healthcare and medicine would be so limited? That was number one. Number two, it was very clear to me that the biology of embryos, when you collect the stem cells in the early blastocyst stage, that's a very early stage of development, didn't necessarily guarantee that embryo was qualitatively good enough to go all the way through to a full-term pregnancy. That was number one. So how would you quality control this? It didn't make any sense. And obviously, the byproducts of an abortion, in many cases, are associated with abnormalities. And why would you want to transfer an abnormality to a recipient? Lo and behold, I was fortunate enough that at the time I had this kind of focus and epiphany. My oldest daughter was in utero, and she taught me, because when I looked at the first ultrasound and she was a peanut-sized embryo, but the placenta was already a large organ, it dawned on me that maybe the placenta's role was to serve as a gatekeeper and or source of cells to participate in the development of the fetus and ultimately to the newborn. And that's when I started looking at placentas and found out, lo and behold, a placenta is a bioreactor. It's a natural factory for the production of stem cells. Now, the great thing about that was that placentas are a waste material, right? After a full-term healthy pregnancy, the placenta is discarded. In fact, hospitals pay to incinerate them because it's biohazardous waste. I said, well, that's a treasure trove of biological material that if I can get stem cells from it, this could potentially solve some of the debate. And more importantly, I couldn't find anyone who objected to using a waste material as a source of stem cells. And more importantly, I recognize that stem cells from a placenta, if it's the product of a healthy newborn, is nature's quality control process graduate. Literally, it's gone through an evolutionary prescribed quality control process to ensure that if the baby is a healthy newborn, the cells from the placenta are likely healthy as well.
So can you just take a moment and explain, you get the placenta, how do you actually harvest the cells, and then what do you do with them?
So over the years, we've developed a number of very sophisticated methodologies to recover and isolate different cell populations from this organ. Now, keep in mind, the placenta is a big organ. Compare a placenta, which has got billions of cells, to an embryo that maybe has a dozen or 24 cells.
Right.
So the simple mass of cells makes a big difference. The way we recover them is either by flushing them out of the circulatory system of the organ. That was a methodology called perfusion that we came up with. Or we isolate the tissue itself, and it's called an explantation. And what we do is we let the cells mechanically dissociate from that tissue and isolate them and collect them and use them to start the growth of a new population of cells. So first and foremost, the placenta is an abundant source of cells, huge quantities. It's a source of all kinds of cells, very primordial, very versatile stem cells, and also very, very focused stem cells, what we call specialized stem cells, as well as you can identify mature cells like immune cells in the organ as well. But the sheer mass of this material and its scalability, because keep in mind, the cells in the placenta are capable of expanding and dividing over and over and over again. I often tell people, if a human being is 25 to 30 trillion cells, every cell, no matter what age you are, originated from cellular material that started in your placenta. So think about the replication fidelity in your lifetime from one cell that made a placenta, maybe a couple of 100 million cells that then gave rise to a fetus, which gave rise to a newborn, which grew up. Over and over and over, these cells are dividing and maturing and specializing, and they're always making perfect or near perfect copies of themselves. So the placenta, in my mind, was the ideal source of cells for any imagined or evolving cellular medicine field.
So once the cells are harvested, and they are stem cells, which means that they can be turned into anything, right? You can turn a stem cell into, an eye cell or a brain cell or a liver cell or a skin cell. What are you guys focused on? Where are you taking so you have perfected the ability to harvest these stem cells from the placenta, and nobody's objecting to it because it's waste product. Now you have these stem cells. What are you doing with them?
So that's the beauty of this field. I believe cellular medicine is one of the most intuitively logical ways to treat disease, because what you're really doing is you're using a perfect cell that you can quality control in order to augment or replace cells which are abnormal or defective. And so the possibilities are almost endless. We can use stem cells to produce immune cells to augment immunity in somebody who has an infectious disease. We can use stem cells to make immune cells that can be used to fight cancer. We can use stem cells to create pluripotent cells which can modulate the immune system and stimulate regeneration. So we have taken cells from the placenta into treating autoimmune disease, into treating cancer, into treating degenerative diseases, and ultimately we see this as being the ideal platform to maintain your health as you age.
So just on that last point, I'd come in here and get shot up with some new stem cells that were harvested from when I was born, from my placenta, and it would be a way of either maintaining or de-aging myself. Is that what you mean?
So one of the hallmarks that we know is responsible for aging is the exhaustion of the pool of stem cells you have in your body, which are there to continually renovate and renew you throughout your lifetime. These cells get worn out. They wear out or they run out. Mm-hmm. So the simple, kind of natural, obvious approach is if I can recharge my regenerative engine, which is in the pool of stem cells that I keep in my body, when they start to run out or they start to become defective, if I can replace them or augment them, I should be able to restore those renovation and renewal and repair processes that I need to stay healthy. So very simply, if you think about it just from the simplest means of the calculus of aging, our biological age is an average, if you will, or a summation of all of the ages, the specific ages of the cells in our body. If we're 25 trillion cells, and I give you 5 trillion newborn cells, average that out, that should make you biologically younger. And that's kind of the goal and objective of most of the longevity efforts today, which is to either reprogram your cells chemically so that they behave younger, or supplement and support your cellular population with younger cells. So the concept of, if you had your placenta stored away, if you had your placental cells stored away, you could thaw them out from the cryopreservation, which is how we store them, And cryopreservation keeps them in a state of suspended animation for decades. We could then give you back your own cells, but they're your own cells that haven't aged. So it's kind of, if you think of the theory of relativity, we're halting the aging process by putting them in cryopreservation. If you could get them back as you have them, they're going to actually help average down the age of all your cells in your body. But here's the beauty of the placenta. You and I, we're not lucky enough to have had our placentas harvested.
You guessed my next question. Right. Go ahead.
But here's the really cool thing. Turns out that one of the sort of epiphanies that I had was that the placenta is nature's universal donor tissue. What I mean by that is the placenta, which is the product of mom and dad's DNA combining to make the fetus and placenta, is a unique genotype, a unique phenotype, and a unique immunotype that a mom accepts for 9 months without rejecting, even though she's only partially matched, right? Mm-hmm. Well, think about surrogate pregnancy. In a surrogate pregnancy, the mother's not even related to the placenta or fetus she's carrying, but she doesn't reject it, it doesn't reject her. That immunotolerance, what we call tolerance, is resident in the cells of the placenta, which means I can give cells from any placenta to any recipient and they will accept them, they will tolerate them.
Can we pause for a second there? So I just want to repeat back what I heard you say. The placenta is basically anybody, it's the universal donor, like in blood, right? If I'm an O type, an O negative, anybody can take my blood.
Right.
The placental cells say to the body, whoever's placental cells, I'm okay, you can accept me. So if I got cancer at some point and you were able to spin out somebody else's stem cells and to treat that cancer, I don't have, I'm 54. My mom did not store my placenta when I was born. So you can take somebody else's placental stem cells, alter them, give them to me, and my body will accept them?
That's right. So in fact, what we have been able to do, and we've shown in the laboratory, and have actually moved into the clinic in some cases, is that a placental-derived immune cell can be engineered, for example, to express a CAR construct. CAR stands for chimeric antigen receptor. It's a way to modify the surface molecules on an immune cell in order for it to traffic and specifically target a type of cancer. I can make one of those cells out of a placentally donated cell and put it into a recipient kind of as an off-the-shelf, one-size-fits-all product. That's the future, in my mind, that's the future of cellular medicine. It's called allogeneic, meaning that the donor and the recipient are two different human beings. And that's, again, the beauty and the elegance of using the placenta as a source of cells. It's designed by nature to be that allogeneic donor.
So do you need to reach into the stem cell and adjust the genetic code to tell the cell, hey, you're supposed to be a liver cell, or you're supposed to be, a tooth cell, or whatever it is? And is that done through CRISPR, or how is that adjusting done?
So kind of two different things here. One is that we live in an era today where you can use several different methods to change the DNA, to change the genetic programming of a cell. You can do that using a virus, and you can transfect and insert DNA into a cell, or you can use enzymatic editing tools like CRISPR and so on and so forth, and you can splice in or splice out a piece of DNA so the cell will make that product and change what it normally expresses. That's one thing we can do, and we use those tools in our laboratory all the time. So I can custom design a cell to express a characteristic that is important to me clinically. But we also know that stem cells are, and nature's smarter than we are, stem cells, when you just put them into an environment, like if I just gave you an unmodified stem cell, in your body, depending upon where it goes, it will read the environment, and it will appropriately differentiate and mature so that it fits where it belongs. So I'll give you an example. When we do bone marrow transplant, and we take what are called hematopoietic or multipotent stem cells, and we inject them back into your system through your bloodstream. Some of the cells go to your bone marrow. Some of the cells go elsewhere. Wherever they go, they mature and specialize appropriately. They don't do something abnormal. That's the genius, the intrinsic intelligence of stem cells, is that when they mature and specialize, they do so based upon signals they see in their environment, and they do so appropriately.
You guys have done lots of research, early stage, preclinical, stage 1 research on different forms of therapies. If you could project out a little bit, how far away are we from seeing cellular therapies become FDA approved and then become ubiquitous in society?
So cell therapy is already here to stay. I'm happy to tell you that in the treatment of cancer, the FDA has approved a number of CAR T therapies which take advantage of engineering your own cells, your own immune cells, to express characteristics to make them better at hunting down and killing cancer. Stem cells, as you know, have been used for bone marrow transplantation or rebuilding the bone marrow for decades, and it's a staple in the treatment of many, many cancers. It's also being used to treat certain inherited metabolic disorders and things like that, where you want to correct the dysfunctional or abnormal genetic programming of
like sickle cell anemia.
Like sickle cell, like for example, certain leukodystrophies. These are inherited metabolic abnormalities. You can actually treat them by giving a stem cell transplant that puts the correct DNA in an individual. But the future is for using stem cells and derivatives of stem cells to effectuate a whole bunch of other clinical benefits, such as improving the quality of your muscle tissue, repairing damaged heart muscle. One of my close colleagues, Dr. Tim Nelson at the Mayo Clinic, is using stem cells from leftover in the cord blood of a baby to augment the surgical repair of congenital heart disease. So cell therapy is rapidly developing into a tool that is going to be more broadly used. But for me, the most exciting part of cellular medicine is the ability to address age-related conditions by restoring the youth of a system by introducing young cells ideally from the placenta.
What are the biggest things that are keeping this back? What's holding back not only Celularity, but the broader group of companies that are doing research in this space?
That's a good question. Look, we live in a highly regulated society and world where we have agencies like the FDA and so on who have a very important responsibility to make sure that people are kept safe, they're not exposed to anything which might be deleterious and so on. It's a complicated and challenging objective. First of all, I'm a big believer that there's always going to be some degree of risk for any breakthrough in technology. Some of the things which have slowed the pace of development in cellular medicine is the need to ensure that the products that are produced from cells have a very high probability of safety. Now, I personally believe that cellular therapy has been around in one way, shape, or form for many, many years, and there's literally millions of people on the planet walking around who are the recipients of some form of cell therapy. I actually believe that cell therapy is fundamentally and intrinsically very safe, as long as the donor material that you use meets a high quality standard, is rigorously processed and manufactured to a very high quality standard, and held to very rigorous release specifications that you can ensure you're not introducing a disease, that you're not introducing an infection, and that you have a high expectation of what the cell will do when it takes up its new residence in an individual.
If you're injecting a patient with an allogeneic stem cell, somebody else's stem cells, is there a blending of DNA, and is there the potential for either translation errors or the passing on of mutations that could eventually even be passed on to children, progeny?
Very good question. So you can't pass it on to progeny unless you alter the germ cells, okay? The cells which are actually either make up sperm or egg. That just administering an adult differentiated or partially differentiated cell into a recipient doesn't alter that recipient's DNA, okay? You're right that if you put a cell in that has an intrinsic defect, right, like a mutation, as long as that cell sticks around, the mutation will be present. Cells don't pass mutations from one to the other, okay? That mutation is resident in the DNA of the cell itself and that cell's specific progeny. But here's the really interesting thing, okay? Which is that when you're administering a stem cell, for example, and it takes up residence, transient or permanent residence, you actually create what's called a chimera. Okay? A chimera is a single organism that houses more than one individual genome. Now, chimerism, I'm a big fan of. Chimerism, I think, is a fundamental biological process where more than one genome can coexist in the same organism. And by the way, we know from the microbiome and so on, we're carrying billions of different genomes in our body at any given time. But the fact is that every bone marrow transplant recipient is a chimera. They have their own DNA they were born with, and they have the new DNA introduced by the stem cells that rebuilt their bone marrow. That's completely tolerable. There's no problem with that. In fact, I actually believe that chimerism has potentially therapeutic potential. I'll give you an example.
Yeah, please.
You've heard of the term hybrid vigor. Hybrid vigor means mom and dad come together, their different DNAs recombine, and now the offspring has certain biological advantages because the new DNA reassembles so the best traits are naturally selected. You remember Darwin. Darwin told us that survival of the fittest, natural selection, will always choose the genetics that will allow for survival, okay? Now, that occurs between generations. Hybrid vigor means mom and dad's generation pass on traits that are advantageous to the next generation. But if I give you stem cells with a different genome, and that genome gives you a survival advantage, it will get upregulated and expressed. It's a concept that I termed 20 years ago chimeric vigor. The nice thing about chimeric vigor is it can occur within a generation, within an individual. So let's say I have a gene that makes me susceptible to developing Alzheimer's disease. Okay, right?
Right.
If I can get stem cells that have a counteracting gene, and I get them and they take up residence in my body, they will afford me a protective advantage to offset some of the disadvantage I was born with. And by the way, chimerism, therapeutic chimerism, is already being proven, and I'll give you a great example. Turns out that about 3 to 4% of the human population cannot get infected with the HIV virus. The reason is they don't express a protein called CCR5. CCR5 is a molecule that exists on the surface of the white blood cell that the HIV virus has to dock to get into the cell. If you don't have it, the HIV virus can't infect your cell. It's been shown that if you take a naturally resistant, HIV-resistant donor and take their stem cells and put them into somebody who has HIV, you can actually convert them to HIV negative.
Can you also then use that as a vaccine? So if you find somebody who is HIV resistant, you take their stem cells, you spin it up, and you inject it in somebody who hasn't been exposed to HIV. It protects them from it. That they become resistant themselves. You get that chimeric vigor.
They do have you can confer that resistance by putting those stem cells in, which repopulate the white blood cells without that CCR5 molecule, so the cells can't be infected by HIV. But it's different than a vaccine, okay?
Okay.
A vaccine is you're introducing a protein to stimulate the immune system to counteract that protein, and that's not that's not a whole cell phenomenon. That's simply an antibody-antigen phenomenon.
Okay.
Okay?
I know that you are going to be rolling out an adult stem cell banking program. Before I get into that, I want to understand, what you have described from the placental stem cells is, like, if I'm sick, I want that. if I don't have access to that, what is the value of the adult stem cell program that you're rolling out?
So, for about 35 years, newborn babies have been lucky enough to, if mom and dad thought about it, to have their leftovers from their umbilical cord, blood, and placenta collected, processed, and cryopreserved and kept in suspended animation in case they ever need it for themselves, either to replace their bone marrow, either to give them a boost to their immune system, etc. And I've heard for many, many years lots of adults say, geez, I wish I did that. Too bad I was so old. Like you just mentioned before, we weren't young enough. When we were babies, they didn't have these technologies. Well, here's the bottom line. We now recognize that no matter what your age, your cells today are arguably going to be better than your cells 10 years from now. So if there's the ability to collect your cells, and you can do it without any risk, and you can do it efficiently, safely, and so on, why not collect your own stem cells as early as you can and put them in the same suspended animation we put cord blood stem cells in? Mm-hmm. Then if you need them later on, they're there. And by the way, this field is moving so quickly, breakthroughs tomorrow may allow you to take stem cells from a year ago and use them to combat the development of degenerative arthritis. They may be helpful to stimulate and support your immune system after a viral infection. So the way I look at it, it's a really inexpensive and convenient way to store away the best copy of your DNA you possibly can get your hands on.
So stem cells are not patentable, right? They are inherent in all of us. IP in biotech is a really, really challenging thing. What are the IP challenges that you face, and what are you doing to protect the work that you're doing?
So specific cells are technically not patentable. Unique biology is not patentable, but the methods to produce that unique biology are patentable. And our company, Cellularity, has built a robust portfolio of intellectual property, roughly 1,000 issued patents that protect all of our methods and all of our discoveries that make these cells unique and productizable. And the reason that we do that is because we've made tremendous investments in the research and science to make the discoveries and do the developments to turn living cells into medicines. And so what we really focus on, rigorously testing things and ensuring that what we believe is unique and proprietary is covered in those patents.
There are two people who have been deeply influential on your professional career and on Cellularity. Peter Diamandis, who is one of the most vocal cheerleaders for the longevity space. He's an investor, and I know he's a board member of this company. And Tony Robbins, also one of the most prolific writers when it comes to management skills and thinking about how to be successful. Both of these men are deeply involved in this company. You talk about the role that they have played with you, both in the building of Cellularity and also just from a personal perspective. Like, what role do Peter and Tony play in your life?
So I'm incredibly fortunate. Peter and Tony are like my extended family. They're like the brothers that I wasn't born with, but fortunately have now. They are two absolutely brilliant visionary people. They are extremely complementary and very different personalities, both incredibly dynamic and hardworking. So what I've gotten from these relationships with Peter is that Peter has always supported and encouraged me to go the extra mile to fully exploit all of the value in the technology that I've been working on. Tony is one of the most generous, inspiring, and communicative people I've ever known. And let's face it, Tony is a hero to millions of people, because what he tells you to do is to remove any limits in your thinking. Peter, very much the same way, but Tony has a reputation for making everyone recognize that the only limits you have are the ones that you impose upon yourself in your mind. And so there's no doubt Cellularity would not exist had it not been for Peter and Tony to be complete encouraging champions what we do. Now, here's the other thing. They put their money and their bodies where their mouth is. They not only believe in cellular medicine and regenerative medicine, but they partake in it. And so, it's very funny. We kind of laughed many, many years ago. We would laugh at the fact that we're kind of like the Mercury astronauts. I've been the recipient of cellular and regenerative therapy for my orthopedic injuries and so on. Peter has, Tony has, and what we say is we're not going to recommend anything that we ourselves weren't willing to do ourselves. And look, Tony is he's a heroic, generous person, right? He does not shy away from putting everything into supporting people's dreams and aspirations. And that was clearly a big part of why I felt the courage to build the original companies and then Celularity after spinning it out from Celgene Corporation.
One of the things you just said was like, the three of you have all benefited individually from cellular therapies in different forms. There's a tremendous amount of attention being paid to longevity science right now, and it is attracting a lot of really bad science, right? There's a lot of bunk out there. People selling supplements, people telling you to, go under certain color lights, like all of these different things that it feels really like snake oil salespeople out there are saying, if you do this, you will live longer, you will live better. When you look at the spotlight that is being paid to longevity now, how do you square this underlying passion of people looking for a life raft versus the science? Like, where do the two meet, and how do you make sure that the science always wins?
It's inevitable that if you have demand for something, there are going to be some segments of the population who are going to want to take advantage of the demand and exploit the vulnerabilities of individuals, right? And so there's no doubt that you cannot pick up a magazine or go online in any type of social media and not see somebody peddling their solution to the problem, right? But it's no different than the same people who are selling, their solution to your lawn care. This is going to make your grass greener than anything else, than just watering and providing fertilizer. The bottom line is that we're fortunate. We do have the pressure of like the Food and Drug Administration and the regulatory world keeping an eye on stuff. And I salute them for being very focused on at least one fundamental principle I've believed in from the beginning, which is quality, right? Quality matters. Quality over quantity always matters. But there's an inevitability that because the science is so complex in longevity,
right,
that people are going to try lots of different approaches. And in some cases, the approaches are based upon personal experience, right? A lot of the supplements I see peddled are because some guy, started taking a certain type of magnesium and suddenly he felt better. So now he's going to peddle that to everybody. The problem is, this is a complicated problem. The solution is going to be equally complicated. I tend not to be reflexively dismissive of things, right? As long as reputationally the individuals out there meet a certain fundamental standard, right? And it's important. And listen, it's important to do your diligence, right, on anything. If just like when you go to the doctor, if the doctor's telling you that to cure your cancer, you got to stick your head in a bowl of olive oil, check out whether or not he's been successful in his career and he's actually giving legitimate advice. But at the same time, there are some things which are shockingly useful, and you would never expect it. But at the same time, we've been told for decades that, fat is bad in your diet, right? That's clearly not true, and so you can imagine there were communities that pushed and pushed and pushed on changing the dietary behavior of an entire society because it served a different end. And so here's my position. You know, Ben Franklin said everything in moderation, right? I think people have to be
from the guy, by the way, who had 13 kids.
right. But bottom line is that I think people have to be smart enough and willing enough to take advantage of all the resources they have to keep themselves well informed. Mm-hmm. Not every key fits every lock. Not every solution fits every problem. Mm-hmm. I'm a big believer in trust but verify. Right? Test and retest. And you will soon find that some things just happen to give you the outcomes you want, even though others may say it's not going to work and dismiss it. And it's our biology is very complicated, the environment's complicated, and so I think everyone, if you're seeking better health as you age, and certain things intellectually resonate with you, give it a try. And if it's working, keep trying it.
So we all know it takes somewhere from 5 to 10 years for a new drug or therapy to be approved by the FDA. So let's advance, time 10 years from now. If you can paint a picture, what does stem cell medicine look like 10 years from now? If I'm a patient and certain things have been approved by the FDA, where are we? What is somebody who has cancer or Parkinson's or dementia, especially Lewy body dementia? Like what is on the horizon for them?
Well, I'm very optimistic that we're reaching a kind of an escape velocity where the science, the clinical experience, the safety track record, and the quality of the systems to make these things into products is reaching a point where there's going to be a sudden avalanche of new therapies that are approved by the agency. The bottom line is cell therapy's been around a long time. We now I think know which types of cells are the best to be productized, pharmaceuticalized, if you will. Mm-hmm. And we know they work in immunotherapy for cancer. So there's no reason why, on the heels of CAR T therapy for lymphoma and multiple myeloma and so on, why we can't skip to the next iteration, which is immunotherapy using cells to treat solid tumors. There's going to have to be some fine-tuning and so on. But I do believe that in 10 years from now, cellular immunotherapy is going to be a fundamental staple in treating cancer. I know for a fact that cellular medicine is going to play a big role in fixing a defective immune system, either a defective immune system that causes autoimmune disease or a defective immune system which makes you vulnerable to a virus. I know in my heart we are on the threshold of that becoming a common reality. But the stuff that I'm really excited about is I know that the fundamental, intuitively logical approach of supporting your biology by introducing young cells into an aging system is going to be a fundamental platform for maintaining high-performance mobility, high-performance cognitive function, high-performance immunity, and youthful aesthetics. And those are the four things that I think if you keep, it makes every extra year you live worth living.
Bob, this has been great. Thank you so much. And I can't wait to see what's coming because I'm getting older, man. It's like I feel it, I see it, and I'm ready for it. So
well, thanks a lot, Lou. I really appreciate it.
This was great.